the arena. My name is Jenny Whitener, and I'm the CEO of Bridge Innovate. It's our pleasure to have you here with us today. We have a special program ahead, but as we get started, just a bit about Bridge Innovate. We're focused on empowering teams to lead, think, and problem solve differently. We offer a range of services from consulting to future lab sprints to leadership accelerator programs, or if you just want to come and hang out at the studio in a creative space, we'd love to see you here. Today's program is really about leadership. And as we get started, before I introduce our guest, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what leadership really means to an organization. It has many realms of impact in terms of people engagement, people performance. But according to this recent published study by Gartner and Forbes, there's specific data that shows that your top 10% leaders can have extraordinary impact on overall profitability. We've known that for many years. We feel it, we assume it, we see it in day-to-day performance, but the data is in. So investing in leadership development is important. Another key point is just kind of frame our conversation today with our guest. It's really looking at this study coming out from Deloitte, where they talk about that 94% of their survey respondents talked about the importance of leadership development, leadership capability, leadership effectiveness. Yet only 23% believe that their organization's leaders currently have that capability. There's so much change going on in the marketplace today. How do we equip leaders to be ready for that? At Bridge Innovate, we're pleased to partner with a number of large corporates to be a part of their leadership development program. And part of staying a part of that game is launching new programming. We've just launched our Future Ready Leadership portfolio across 4 tracks, and we'll have more programming coming up about that shortly. The conversation on leadership is deep, and today our guest will help us see that. We're happy to have with us today Tom White and Wendy Gibson. They have an extraordinary career with Unum, one of the largest insurance companies in the disability and employee benefits marketplace. They were both senior vice presidents, and we're really thrilled to have with us today to share their experiences and their backgrounds on their own leadership journey, as well as developing others. So let me just start with a little bit of introduction. Wendy, would you just start with telling the folks with us today a bit about yourself, your background, and then I'll hand it off to Tom.
Thanks, Jenny. As you said, 30 plus years with Unum, and I spent a lot of time in a lot of different areas, right out of college for the most part, and spent time in underwriting for a number of years, moved to the contact center, led some of our service teams, also facilities, real estate, accounts payable, procurement, those kind of things, and then back to our client services. So I have this broad perspective of the business, loved it, and just recently retired in April.
Fantastic. Congratulations, and thanks for being with us today. Tom, give everybody a bit of background about yourself.
I will. Thank you, Jenny and Wendy. It's always a pleasure to be with you, but Wendy's a more recent retiree. I'm a more mature retiree in that I'm coming up on 3 years, which is kind of weird to think about. It's been a very quick 3 years, but I spent 40 years with the company. The first 10 or so, I was in the investments department, which kind of matched my education and what I did there. But the last 30 years or so, Wendy worked all around the company, and I was kind of a one-trick pony. And then I spent most of my time dealing with financial communications, so investor relations, dealing with the rating agencies, shareholders, analysts, and I had other aspects to the job. Did a lot with community relations, employee communications, media things. But what I kind of discovered in the early 90s is how much I enjoyed working with external audiences, shareholders, analysts, the financial community, and kind of built a career around that. So as I said, I retired about 3 years ago, and now I'm much more of an expert in things like Medicare and Social Security. Wendy doesn't know anything about that; she's much too young. But I'll offer some educational seminars, Wendy, when you get to that point in life.
That's great. Well, thank you both for being here. What I thought was so fabulous about having you both today is that you come from two very different parts of the organization. And I know that what kind of led us to today's discussion is we were talking about the challenge for leaders today, this breadth of perspective that they need to bring to their job every day, both the extraordinary abilities that you would have in leading an operation, but also being aware of the market and the trends of what investors and stakeholders are looking for. So let's explore that in a little bit of detail today. Wendy, I wanted to start with you. And I was just going to ask you to just start at the beginning. What, from your experience, are the skills that are needed for leaders today?
Thanks, Jenny. And that is a huge question when you think about, like, there's these technical skills that you need to do your job. There's these soft skills that you need in leading a team and culture and all of those things. But more and more, I don't know. I spent 18 years in underwriting. I felt like I knew the marketplace. I knew how to price business, all of the technical things that you need. But in reality, like, you really need to know, like, what are all the downstream operations that we should be making sure that we price into our business? Like, what are all the connect points that we need to serve our customers? Like, there are just things that you need to know. So when I think about, we no longer just have business leaders and technology leaders or finance leaders. Like, you need to have a broad view of the company to do the best job you can where you are today. And that became really obvious to me through a lot of different experiences, but everything is really intertwined. Everybody has their specialty, but you have to engage across the business to both inform and influence kind of where you are and what they need.
It's very interesting when you say that leaders need to know all the way across the business. I think also technology has connected all the different operational perspectives. So, it's kind of like that whack-a-mole game. You hit in one place and it pops out somewhere else. So that really that interconnectedness of the operational system demands that leaders today understand that breadth and understand how things work together. Tom, take us to the other perspective. Wendy's kind of helped us to see the importance of being really kind of an in-depth generalist about the full organization. How do you bring in the marketplace, the stakeholder, the investor perspective into the skill set that's needed for leaders?
Yeah, I mean, something I really emphasized with people around the company was, to really understand the company's business, and how your particular area, your function, your department fit into the overall aspects of the company. I also thought it was important for people to understand, what impacts our business, what impacts specifically what you do, but also what impacts the company. And, they're specifically thinking about Unum, certainly interest rates were, an influence. And so I think, people need to understand what's going on in that part of the financial market. The overall economy certainly impacted, and more specifically, things like credit conditions, employment trends, wage growth. We did an interesting study. We were trying to mathematically figure out what drives Unum stock. And we looked at a fellow that worked for me, Matt Barnett, did a bunch of work doing a lot of regression analysis. And we found that oil prices had an impact on Unum stock. And you might wonder, why in the world would oil prices have an impact on the stock? And it's because the market perceived Unum to have an outsized exposure in our investment portfolio to energy credits. And so when you'd see oil prices go up, you'd see Unum stock trade up a little bit more, and oil prices go down, Unum stock would trade down. Now, that's just something it was interesting to know, and it was interesting to kind of keep our management team apprised that, okay, what that means is that the market, the financial market, has a concern about that. And so we need to think about, is that important enough for us to make any kind of strategic decisions about, and which we didn't, but knowing that I thought was helpful. And the other thing I'd point out, when we're talking about AI technologies and things like that, what I used to emphasize is understand, who these people are that are focusing in on the company, and also what are their tools. And an interesting one I'd highlight is, one of my jobs was to write earnings releases and do conference call scripts, and we would present those, quarterly to the market. The way things work in the investment world is if you think about it, an analyst or a shareholder or a big portfolio manager has literally hundreds, if not thousands, of stocks they're looking at. So they use AI tools. And there's an AI tool that will, in a heartbeat, read a earnings release or read a conference call transcript and score it. And so we would get that. We went out and bought that same AI tool, and we'd run our earnings release and our conference call script through that. And we would literally go through and look at what are the red words in there that would score us down and what were the green words that would give us a higher score. And I can remember silly arguments that I would have with our CFO and the CEO over specific words that they liked, but they scored red, and I'd come up, we need to have a green version for that word or that phrase. But again, may sound silly, but investors are using those tools. You need to understand how those tools work and how they impact, their view of the company, and we would make adjustments accordingly.
In the development space, the professional development space, a lot of time we'll talk about a T-shaped leader. Mm-hmm. And a T-shaped leader is someone who has the breadth to look across. So I'm hearing Wendy talk about that, really, and understand the interdependency of the operation so that you're not making decisions in silos, you're leading with an organizational perspective. And then, Tom, what I'm hearing you talk about is that T-shaped actually goes really like externally into the market, but then deep inside the organization, and having enough depth of expertise to understand interdependencies, influences, using new tools like AI to begin to explore those influences and how that might affect your decision-making or your positioning, right, in the market. Yeah. Before we go into our next question, I just have to ask, because you've just talked about a huge arena of skills. When you're working to develop leaders in your own organization, how did you give them those opportunities? Is it shadow experiences? Is it mentor? How do you develop that?
Well, for me, it was a lot of shadow experiences, and it was interesting because there would be a group of people within the company that really kind of caught on to the impact or the effect that the outside external financial analysts and Wall Street folks had on the company. And, I found myself, having lunch a lot of times with people, just kind of explaining how they work, what their thought process is, what their analysis is, and what their views are. And it can be very different because, internally we have, a message that we want to deliver to employees, and it's important to do that. And you develop culture, which is obviously extremely important. But, I'd say, just having just kind of that well-rounded approach that a leader can have to understand, okay, this is our culture, this is what drives it, but this is the outside world, and this is how they're looking at us. These are the and this is the impact that they can have on us. So I think all those are important. So for me, it was a lot of one-on-one discussions. It was lunches. I'd have people stop by my office after a quarterly earnings release, and the stock may do this or that, and they come by and, why in the world did that happen? And I try to explain that, okay, while we may focus in on these things, these specific areas, right, outside folks, might, like I said, oil prices, you'd think, why in the world oil prices? But for a period of time, it was a very important factor on the company stock price and something that, we just needed to recognize.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing two things. One is that for the individual who's wanting to develop, to pursue that curiosity. When you said somebody came by my office and asked, right? Or maybe they popped you a text message. It doesn't matter in today's environment. It doesn't matter. They reached out. I'm curious. Help me understand. And then for the leader who has the knowledge, the gift of your time, right? The gift of your time to mentor and help develop others, because I think they could go on the internet today and find out a lot of information, but they don't have the context and the implications, maybe the wisdom, the experience of what it really means to your organization. And so that time becomes so critically important. Yeah. Anything else that you would add there before we go on?
The only thing I would say is that one of the things that we were working on when I was sort of transitioning out was really thinking about the lower level managers and like, what does it take to get to the next level? What does it look like if I'm doing the next job? It's not just being a great manager, is a great director, is a great officer. Like there are different expectations of leadership and what you need to know, how you interact, how you influence, all of those things. And to me, we were going down a path of like really starting to set those expectations early on so they understand like what is needed. It's not that I'm just a good manager. Now I can go be a great officer. Like, well, you need to start building those skills now and make sure that you find ways to plug in. So
there have been times over the years when I've been involved in leadership development, we talked about the 3 C's: character, competence, and courage, right? And what you're doing is talking about what are the competencies
right.
you need at your level of leadership, and then maybe some character elements like this is what we expect in terms of how you interact. And it's the courage to go get it, right? The courage to say, here's where I am and here's what I need development with. Can you help me? And sort of reaching out for that. You know, one of the things, and I know you still feel this because in the day-to-day environment, change is all around us. I don't keep saying, how can it get faster? But it does feel like there is change acceleration constantly. And the complexity of change that's affecting us in our society, in our business arena, with whether it's regulatory shifts or economic pressures, those types of things. Let's talk a little bit about what that means for leaders trying to look ahead and stay ahead of building their own skill set. Maybe, Wendy, if you would start for me and talk about that.
Yeah, pace of change is unbelievable. How people keep up with it, I think it's about weeding out some of the noise because you can't chase down everything. And so to me, it's like there are very specific things that you need to focus on, whether it's a skill that you lack or just how do we stay connected across the organization for very specific skills. And I think people who come to the table with curiosity, willingness to pivot, are you bringing the right people to the table? You don't have a fear of asking questions. That's really, really important. And again, connecting dots and relationship building is super important. And to me, you've got to be constantly asking questions, having those lunches with Tom White. I don't know how many people I've met with all the time who are from various organizations who are like, just tell me about your organization. How do you understand this? There are those set organizations, set kind of relationships that I had all the time. Like I was joined at the hip with my technology key partners, my finance key partners, and we met regularly because they needed to understand my business. They needed to understand like how we ticked, like what are the key drivers of efficiency? What are the key drivers of effectiveness? What are our customers asking for? Like all of those things they needed to understand. Otherwise, with pace of change, I mean, our tech partners could be off going after every shiny new penny. And that's just so disruptive to an organization if we're not focused on where is it we're trying to go, what problem are we trying to solve, and what outcome are we trying to achieve. So to me, it's a lot of getting some outside perspective. I love, industry, knowledge that you can get, whether it's in your industry or outside of your industry, as long as it's related to what you're doing. It's very valuable for you. And then to bring that information back to the organization, but also all of the connectedness just across the organization is really critical.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. One of the key points that you just made were understanding the drivers. Right. And by you talked about technology and finance. And I thought, if I were going to take 2 partners into a business arena, I want technology and finance. Right. It's interesting that you chose those 2 to give in your example. But then also understanding the drivers for the business area that you're leading, and then for the supporting entities, whether it's finance or technology, to understand those as well. Tom, what would you add there in terms of change?
Yeah, I thought Wendy, she brought up a great point about understanding what your competitors do, and even go beyond that. If you're managing a function, who's best in class at that function. It might be within your industry, it might be in another industry. But I always found a lot of value in conferences that we would go to, and just meeting the people that do my job at other companies and understand what they do, what are some of the tools that they use, how have they advanced in their career, how do they, connect with the Wendy Gibsons of their particular business. but just, be very, very purposeful about that, and really, just kind of dig into, what others are doing, and learn as much as you can about what other companies and what competitor companies and kind of best in class companies are doing.
That sounds great. So that importance of having that external view, knowing what your competitors are up to and what's happening in the marketplace, and even what customer expectations, might be changing.
Yeah.
We've seen some leaders that we're working with talk about how they're changing their staff meetings, that they'd have like a team meeting, and how historically it was really focused on, problems for the week or problems for the quarter. But now they're either appointing one meeting every other meeting or every month to say, let's look external, and assigning different things for those participants to come in and report on. So it's not just, like you're saying, Tom, it has to almost be an accountability to look externally. That's a great challenge, but then how do you make sure it gets woven in to the day-to-day workings of a team? So let's keep going on this, because a little bit of what we're talking about is having this quest of curiosity, like I've just got to have this insatiable amount of what's happening externally, what's happening internally, what are the interdependencies. But when you're looking at that curiosity, there's also, what does that mean? What does it mean from a future scenario standpoint? Tom, talk a little bit about leadership development here and how you prepare leaders to, surge and growing, and also being able to imagine future kind of systems thinking.
Yeah, I tell you, I really hit on the whole scenario planning concept, and just understand, you understand your job, your what your function is within the company, how the company works, but also understand what those impacts are, and have scenarios so that, regulatory changes, big in the insurance world, just being able to respond as quickly as possible to whatever's happening from a regulatory perspective. We talked about artificial intelligence and how that drives different aspects of the business. When I was retiring, and probably one of the reasons I retired when I did, is that there was a very significant accounting change that was coming down the road for the insurance industry. And, that was years and years of planning internally, not only to have the accounting systems in place and to be able to explain it, but, just having everyone realized that we were going to be judged a little bit differently going forward, because the numbers and the way we were going to present ourselves financially was going to be a little bit different. So, I just think that being able to understand scenarios, plan for them, are so important. It's kind of interesting. I went to the opening of the new Embassy Suites hotel downtown, and it was kind of fun to see a bunch of people there. But the head of Hilton Hotels in the U.S. was there. And, he was talking about scenario planning, and how, if there's a hurricane, there's a whole book that those hotels have. If there's a fire, there's a whole book that they have. But in the hotel industry, when COVID hit, there was not a book that explained what to do when the world stops traveling if you're in the hotel business. And whenever I see Wendy, I always got to think of, she was played such a pivotal role in what Unum did, and how we equipped, I don't know how many thousands of people to go home, literally over the weekend, and do their job from home and do it seamlessly. Now, we all know I failed at that right away, and Wendy was nice enough to keep the office open so I could come back in.
You never missed a day in the office.
I never missed a day. Wendy gave me a little perfect attendance award for that. And I still have that. But just understanding, what are the possible impacts, and then kind of what are the impossible impacts, and how are you going to respond quickly, because your customers, they're still there. They still, somebody's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
If you don't, your customer is going to go elsewhere. But, just having that mindset of being able to pivot, to change, to adapt to what's going on, and having the flexibility to meet whatever challenge is thrown at you.
Yeah. Well, I've been in the arena for quite a few years doing leadership development. And in the what I would call the old days, this scenario planning and sort of strategic foresight, there was like a group of a small team that did that for a company, and they would kind of look at the 5-year horizon, and some of those things would happen. Today, what you're talking about, Tom, is it's almost a skill for every leader today to be able to understand these forces that are coming in and then to imagine this scenario. How will we respond? And it may not be for everything, but to at least prioritize what you think are the probables or the possibles. And then have a point of view about how you might react so that you're not caught off guard. You can't anticipate everything. We didn't anticipate COVID, as you said, but I think it's important for leaders to know that foresight, strategic foresight, and a bit of scenario planning is a critical skill for leaders today. And you need that to survive. Let's talk a little bit about what overall leaders can do to accelerate their own impact for themselves and their teams. And you think about them building leadership skills. Is there anything that you would suggest for leaders to accelerate their growth and their impact?
Jenny, a couple things I'll mention is just, we've hit on this before, but it's like, just know your business and know it end to end. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think you've got to be intentional. I think it is part of our culture for leaders at all levels, right? And I think it is part of our DNA to like think about what's happening down the road, because one, you can't turn on a dime. And so you have to be planful about such things, but it's also not once a year kind of exercise. So how do you build that in? And I think there are great opportunities to have, whether it's, you can't overdo it. You still got to run your business. But like quarterly, I would bring my leadership team together. We talk about like, what are the things that we need to do to think about the future? Bring in your front line. Bring in a variety of people who have experiences outside of our industry that we should be thinking about for the business down the road. But like being really intentional about setting aside a little bit of time. But you have to build it into your culture as well. But I also think leaders who need to develop some skills need to start reaching out, like learn a little bit about what's making finance tick, or how do I learn about data strategy or the analytics world, and like how can I influence or just understand the impact. So I think you have to be pretty intentional about expanding and keeping up with the accelerated pace.
Right. So that curiosity on steroids. Go get
That's
it.
right.
Right.
But you can't overwhelm yourself. I mean, you have to do your day job too. So it's like, how do you just build that into your culture and into just sort of your day to day as well?
Right. It's interesting too that Tom mentioned a little bit about AI. We're also seeing that become an immediate companion for a lot of leaders to search for information, to even do some early scenarios. We were working with a client the other day on a project where they were looking at expanding into a new channel. And so we were, doing some prompts with AI saying, considering this particular industry and these competitors, how would you see my scenario playing out for this channel? What are what are the opportunities for us, and how would we prepare for that kind of thing? And that's a start, right?
Yeah.
It's not the end all, but it's the beginning. Tom, anything else that you would give some input on in terms of accelerating growth and impact?
Yeah, I just feed off of it again in my job. I talked about the doing just a simple earnings release, and I can remember years ago, if I had an hour, 20 minutes of it was work, writing that script and getting the numbers in the right place, and maybe 20 minutes was kind of analyzing it, and 20 minutes was thinking about, okay, how's the outside world going to look at it? And these days, you can use artificial intelligence to write that thing in about 20 seconds. So that's a minute of time now, and now you've got so much more time to devote to more productive things. And in my case, productivity was making sure that my CEO and CFO were prepared for the types of questions they were going to get based on those results that were coming out. So it just, maybe we weren't using, when I was there, AI, to write the thing, but it was getting much more efficient in preparing it. And it gave us just so much more time for the analysis and the strategic thinking about, what kind of questions are we going to get, and how can we have, our management team best prepared to be able to deal with those questions.
Great. Yeah. I think that, that what I'm hearing you talk about is having the intentionality to understand those shifts, and then also having the intentionality and the accountability to pursue the questions, right? And don't let it be like somebody else's job's got to figure that out. But like, at least pursue it and have the ownership to take it forward. So great. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop sharing that so I can go back to what's ahead. It's been great having you guys here today. I'm going to see if I can get to the right information. There we go. We have a lot of things going on at Bridge Innovate. I talked about our Future Ready Leader program, where we've pulled together faculty and a facilitation team that have experience across a number of different universities, and also bringing in our executives and residents like Tom and Wendy that bring in advisory and concepts from the real world, right? And the leadership experience they have into our leadership programming. We hope that you'll consider reaching out to us at bridgeinnovate.com. You can reach me at jenny.whitener@bridgeinnovate.com to explore why we might be a great partner for you in professional development. So coming up, our next programming, we have the Future Ready Leader Test Drive. You can hear more about that programming coming up September the 23rd. We've got a great conversation coming up with Kevin O'Meara, the Executive Vice President at Shaw Industry, about igniting a transformation culture. And then also a very special guest on the hidden catalyst. What is this whole thing of group intelligence and innovation? I cannot wait for that one on October the 3rd. I hope you'll join us again. Wendy and Tom, thanks so much for your advice today. We appreciate you so much. Have a great day.